when 9-year-old Princess Charlotte stepped into the state dining room wearing the Spencer tiara, the same delicate diamond masterpiece that had crowned her grandmother Diana on her wedding day. The entire royal household fell silent. It wasn't supposed to happen. The tiara had been locked away for decades, deemed too precious and too painful for public display. Yet there she stood, the late princess's granddaughter, looking remarkably like Diana at the same age, wearing the family heirloom that had witnessed both the highest joy and deepest sorrow of the royal family. The photograph taken in that moment would soon divide a nation, spark international headlines, and force the monarchy to confront questions they had spent years avoiding. Some called it a beautiful tribute to a beloved princess. Others whispered of manipulation, of using a child to rewrite history. Palace staff who had served Diana personally broke down in tears. Social media exploded with millions of reactions within hours. The Archbishop of Canterbury received urgent calls. Even the Queen's former private secretary emerged from retirement to comment on what many considered the most significant royal moment since Diana's funeral. But this story isn't just about a tiara or a photograph. It's about how one spontaneous moment revealed the deep fractures still running through the House of Windsor, the ongoing battle between tradition and modernity, and the complex legacy of a woman whose influence refuses to fade even decades after her death. It's about how a young girl unknowingly stepped into the center of a storm that would test the very foundations of the British monarchy and force everyone, from palace servants to world leaders, to choose sides in a conflict nobody saw coming. The morning of March 15th began like any other at Kensington Palace. Princess Charlotte had woken early, as she often did, her curiosity about the world around her already stirring before the household staff had even begun their daily routines. At 9 years old, she possessed the kind of fearless exploration that made her nannies nervous and her parents proud. Today would be different, though nobody could have predicted how different. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had been called away unexpectedly to handle a crisis involving one of her charities. A scandal had erupted overnight involving misappropriated funds, and her immediate presence was required for damage control. William had left even earlier for a military engagement in Scotland that couldn't be postponed. This left Charlotte in the care of Maria Gonzalez, her trusted nanny, and the regular palace staff who had watched the young princess grow from a toddler into the spirited child she had become. The trouble began, as it often did with Charlotte, during what was supposed to be a quiet educational session. Maria had planned a morning of history lessons, focusing on the royal family tree. Charlotte had always shown unusual interest in family stories, particularly those involving the grandmother she had never met. Diana's name came up frequently in these lessons, though always handled with the delicate care that palace protocol demanded. Charlotte had been studying a family photograph when she asked the question that would change everything. "Maria, why don't we ever see Granny Diana's pretty crown? The one from the wedding pictures." The Spencer tiara, with its distinctive heart-shaped centerpiece and flowing diamond garlands, had captured Charlotte's imagination from the first time she had seen it in a history book. Maria, caught off guard by the directness of the question, had hesitated. The tiara was indeed at the palace, stored in a climate-controlled vault in the private apartments. It had been returned to the royal collection after extensive negotiations with the Spencer family following Diana's death. The decision to house it at Kensington Palace, Diana's former home, had been seen as appropriate by all parties involved. However, it had remained untouched and unviewed for over 2 decades, too charged with emotion and memory for anyone to feel comfortable disturbing it. "It's kept safe, darling," Maria had replied carefully. "Very special things need very special care." But Charlotte's curiosity, once awakened, proved impossible to satisfy with diplomatic answers. Throughout the morning, she returned to the subject repeatedly. During lunch, she asked whether the tiara was heavy. During her afternoon rest period, she wondered aloud whether it still sparkled. By tea time, she had worn down Maria's resistance with the persistence that only a determined 9-year-old could muster. The decision to show Charlotte the tiara was not made lightly. Maria called the palace curator, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who had been responsible for the royal collection for over 30 years. Dr. Hartwell had been present when the tiara was first brought to the palace, had overseen its careful preservation, and had turned down dozens of requests over the years to photograph or display it. When Maria explained Charlotte's interest, however, Dr. Hartwell found herself in an unusual position. The princess has every right to see her grandmother's belongings, Dr. Hartwell had said after a long pause. Perhaps it's time. The vault containing the tiara was located in what had once been Diana's private study. The room had been maintained exactly as she had left it, down to the fresh flowers that were replaced weekly and the books that remained open to the pages she had been reading. Entering this space was always an emotional experience for the staff who had known Diana personally, but, for Charlotte, it was simply another room in her home. Dr. Hartwell handled the tiara with the reverence reserved for the most precious artifacts. As she lifted it from its velvet-lined case, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall windows caught the diamonds, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the walls. Charlotte gasped, her young eyes widening with genuine wonder. The tiara was more beautiful than any photograph could capture, delicate yet substantial, clearly crafted by master jewelers who understood that true elegance lay in perfect proportions rather than excessive ornamentation. "Can I touch it?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Hartwell looked uncertain. Palace protocol was clear about handling priceless artifacts, especially ones with such emotional significance. But something about the moment felt different. Here was Diana's granddaughter, showing the same natural grace and curiosity that her grandmother had possessed, asking to connect with a piece of family history that belonged, in many ways, as much to her as to anyone. Very gently, Dr. Hartwell agreed, guiding Charlotte's small fingers to touch the metal band that would sit against the wearer's head. "This was made in 1919 for your great-great-grandmother." Charlotte's touch was reverent, her face serious with concentration as she traced the intricate metalwork. "It's warm," she said, surprised. "Metal always warms to human touch," Dr. Hartwell explained. "Your grandmother used to say the same thing." The conversation that followed revealed Charlotte's deep fascination with family history and her particular connection to Diana's memory. She asked intelligent questions about the tiara's creation, its symbolism, and its journey through the family. Dr. Hartwell found herself sharing stories she hadn't told in years, memories of Diana's own curiosity about royal traditions, and her sometimes irreverent approach to protocol. It was during this conversation that Charlotte made the request that would change everything. "Could I try it on? Just for a minute?" The question hung in the air like a challenge to decades of careful tradition. Dr. Hartwell's first instinct was to refuse. The tiara hadn't been worn since Diana's wedding day. It existed now more as a memorial than as a piece of jewelry. Moving it from its case was already pushing boundaries. Actually wearing it seemed impossible. But Charlotte's expression was so hopeful, so innocent of the complications her request created, that Dr. Hartwell found herself hesitating. Maria, who had remained silent during most of the conversation, stepped forward. "Perhaps we should call her parents," she suggested diplomatically. Charlotte's face fell slightly, but she nodded with the resignation of a child who had learned that adult consultation usually meant adult refusal. "They'll say no," she said matter-of-factly. Dr. Hartwell looked at the young princess, seeing in her face an echo of Diana that was almost heartbreaking in its clarity. She thought of all the times over the years when protocol had prevented meaningful connections, when fear of controversy had locked away beauty and history. She thought of Diana herself, who had always believed in breaking down barriers that separated people from their heritage. "Your parents aren't here right now," Dr. Hartwell said slowly. "And sometimes special moments happen when we're not expecting them." Maria's eyes widened as she realized what Dr. Hartwell was suggesting. "Dr. Hartwell, are you certain this is wise?" The curator was quiet for a long moment, weighing decades of training against an instinct that told her this moment was important in ways she couldn't fully understand. "No," she said finally, "but I think it might be right." The process of placing the tiara on Charlotte's head was performed with ceremonial care. Dr. Hartwell explained each step, from the proper way to hold the delicate structure to the traditional method of securing it without damaging the hair beneath. Charlotte stood perfectly still, understanding instinctively that she was participating in something significant. When the tiara was finally in place, the transformation was remarkable. The diamonds caught the light and seemed to illuminate Charlotte's face from within. The proportions, designed for an adult woman, should have overwhelmed a child's features, but instead they seemed to enhance Charlotte's natural dignity. For a moment, time seemed suspended as three women looked at a little girl who had become, in that instant, a living bridge between past and present. "You look just like her," Maria whispered, tears gathering in her eyes. Charlotte turned to look at herself in the mirror that had once reflected Diana's image, and her expression grew serious. She stood straighter, as if understanding that she was carrying something more than jewelry. The weight of the tiara seemed to settle her rather than burden her, and when she smiled, it was with a confidence that surprised all three of them. Dr. Hartwell reached for her phone, an action that would later be analyzed and criticized by countless commentators. "We should capture this moment," she said. "History is happening." The photograph she took was simple and unstaged. Charlotte stood in natural light by the window, the tiara catching the afternoon sun, her expression serene and somehow knowing. She looked every inch a princess. But, more than that, she looked like Diana's granddaughter finally, connecting with a piece of her heritage that had been kept from her too long. None of them could have predicted that this private moment would become public within hours, or that the image would spark debates that would reach the highest levels of government. They were simply three people sharing in the magic of a young girl discovering her own history, and for those few minutes, that was enough. The photograph should never have left Dr. Hartwell's phone. Palace security protocols were explicit about images taken within the royal residences, particularly those involving family members in unofficial circumstances. But, as Charlotte posed naturally in the window light, wearing Diana's Spencer tiara with such unconscious grace, Dr. Hartwell felt compelled to preserve the moment. She took 3 pictures, each capturing a different angle of Charlotte's quiet dignity as she wore the precious family heirloom. What happened next would be debated in newspapers, royal biographies, and parliamentary committees for months to come. Dr. Hartwell, moved by the profound beauty of the moment and perhaps influenced by decades of watching meaningful royal history locked away from public view, made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She sent the photograph to her daughter, Sarah, with a simple message: "Sometimes magic still happens in palaces." Sarah Hartwell Morrison worked as a freelance journalist specializing in cultural heritage stories. She had built her reputation on thoughtful pieces about art preservation and historical significance, steering clear of the sensational royal coverage that dominated much of the British press. When she received the photograph from her mother, her first reaction was purely emotional. The image was stunning, capturing something ineffable about family legacy and the continuation of history through generations. Sarah sat with the photograph for over an hour before making her own fateful decision. She called her editor at the Sunday Times, James McKinnon, a veteran journalist who had covered royal affairs for over 20 years. McKinnon's expertise lay in understanding not just what made news, but what made news that mattered. When Sarah described the photograph to him, his immediate response was cautious interest. "You understand what this could mean?" McKinnon asked after Sarah had sent him the image. The photograph showed Charlotte not just wearing the tiara, but wearing it with such natural confidence that she looked like a young Diana herself. The resemblance was striking, but, more than that, there was something in Charlotte's expression that suggested this wasn't mere dress-up. She looked like she belonged in the tiara, like she understood its significance even as a child. "It's beautiful, James," Sarah had replied. "It's a granddaughter connecting with her grandmother's memory. How could that be controversial?" McKinnon, however, understood the complexities that Sarah, for all her intelligence, hadn't fully grasped. The Spencer tiara represented more than just Diana's wedding day. It symbolized her independence from royal tradition, her connection to her noble family rather than the monarchy she had married into. For Charlotte to be photographed wearing it, especially without official palace approval, suggested narratives that the current royal family might find uncomfortable. The photograph was published online at precisely 6 o'clock Sunday evening, accompanied by Sarah's carefully crafted article titled "A Granddaughter's Tribute. Princess Charlotte Honors Diana's Memory." The piece was respectful, focusing on the emotional significance of family heirlooms and the importance of connecting young people with their heritage. Sarah had deliberately avoided speculation about palace politics or official reactions, presenting the moment as a natural and beautiful expression of family love. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Within minutes of publication, the newspaper's website crashed from the volume of traffic. Social media platforms exploded with shares, comments, and reactions that ranged from tearful admiration to fierce criticism. The hashtag Charlotte's Diana moment began trending worldwide within the first hour, accompanied by thousands of side-by-side comparisons between Charlotte in the tiara and Diana on her wedding day. The resemblance was undeniable and haunting. Charlotte's facial structure, the way she held her head, even her slight smile, seemed to echo her grandmother's expression from that famous day in 1981. Supporters praised the photograph as a beautiful tribute to Diana's enduring legacy. Critics, however, saw something more calculated, suggesting that the image had been staged to deliberately evoke Diana's memory for political purposes. At Kensington Palace, the first indication that something had gone wrong came through James Prescott, the duty press officer, who received his first call about the photograph at 6:23 p.m. By 6:45, his phone was ringing continuously with requests for comment from international media outlets. The palace's official social media accounts were being flooded with questions, congratulations, and demands for clarification about the circumstances surrounding the photograph. Prince William learned about the photograph while reviewing briefing notes for the next day's military engagement. His private secretary, Simon Morrison, interrupted the preparation with news that required William's immediate attention. Morrison's expression was grave as he handed William his tablet displaying the Sunday Times article. William's reaction was complex and immediate. His first emotion was protective anger at the thought of his daughter being used in what appeared to be an unauthorized media event. His second was a deeper, more complicated feeling as he looked at Charlotte wearing the tiara that held so many memories of his mother. The resemblance between his daughter and Diana was something the family had often noted privately, but seeing it captured so dramatically in a photograph brought back emotions he thought he had long since processed. Catherine learned of the situation through a text message from her private secretary while she was still dealing with the charity crisis that had occupied her entire day. The timing couldn't have been worse. She was already managing one public relations challenge when suddenly, faced with another that was potentially far more serious. Her immediate concern was for Charlotte, who had presumably been photographed without any understanding of the implications. The couple's first call was to Charlotte herself, who answered the phone with innocent enthusiasm about her exciting day. "Mummy, I wore Granny Diana's crown. It was so beautiful, and Dr. Hartwell said I looked just like her." Charlotte's joy was infectious, but it made William and Catherine's position even more difficult. How could they explain to their 9-year-old daughter that her magical moment had become a source of controversy? Dr. Hartwell was summoned to meet with palace officials within 2 hours of the photograph's publication. The meeting, held in the same study where Charlotte had worn the tiara earlier that day, included William's private secretary, the palace press team, and security personnel who needed to understand how unauthorized images had been taken and distributed. Dr. Hartwell's explanation was honest and complete, but it did little to ease the concerns of officials who understood the broader implications of the situation. The curator's emotional attachment to the moment, her genuine belief that she had facilitated something beautiful and meaningful, was clear to everyone present. However, her lack of consideration for protocol and potential consequences was equally evident. "Dr. Hartwell," Simon Morrison said carefully, "you understand that this photograph will be interpreted in ways you never intended. There are people who will see political manipulation rather than family connection." The curator's response was passionate and immediate. "That child has every right to connect with her grandmother's memory. We've spent too many years hiding beauty and meaning behind protocol and fear. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the safe thing to do." Meanwhile, the photograph continued to generate reactions around the world. In the United States, major news networks led their evening broadcasts with the story. CNN's royal correspondent called it the most significant royal image since Diana's funeral. NBC focused on the striking resemblance between grandmother and granddaughter. Fox News questioned whether the photograph represented appropriate use of a child for political messaging. International reactions were equally varied. French media celebrated the image as a beautiful tribute to Diana's enduring influence on global fashion and royal protocol. German newspapers analyzed the constitutional implications of Charlotte wearing a tiara from her maternal family rather than the crown jewels. Australian media focused on Diana's popularity in the Commonwealth and what Charlotte's tribute might mean for future royal visits. The most significant reaction, however, came from an unexpected source. Earl Spencer, Diana's brother and Charlotte's great-uncle, issued a statement through his representatives that surprised everyone involved. Rather than expressing concern about unauthorized use of the family tiara, he praised the photograph as a beautiful reminder that Diana's spirit lives on in the next generation of her family. Earl Spencer's statement shifted the narrative in ways that palace officials hadn't anticipated. His explicit approval of Charlotte wearing the Spencer tiara gave the situation a legitimacy that made criticism more difficult. If Diana's own family supported Charlotte's tribute, arguments about appropriateness became more complex. Social media analysis revealed fascinating patterns in public response. Older users, particularly those who remembered Diana's death, were more likely to view the photograph as a beautiful tribute. Younger users were more likely to question the circumstances surrounding its creation. Parents, regardless of age, tended to focus on Charlotte's apparent happiness and comfort in the photograph, seeing it as evidence that the experience had been positive for the child herself. Celebrity reactions added another layer to the story's development. Elton John, who had performed at Diana's funeral and remained close to her memory, posted a simple but powerful response. Diana would be so proud. His endorsement carried significant weight, given his personal relationship with Diana and his avoidance of most royal commentary over the years. Fashion experts weighed in on the significance of the Spencer tiara itself, explaining its history and design to audiences who might not understand its cultural importance. The tiara's association with Diana's independence, its distinctly non-royal origins, and its role in some of the most iconic photographs of the 20th century all contributed to the complexity of Charlotte's tribute. By midnight, the photograph had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. News organizations worldwide had picked up the story, translating it into dozens of languages and adapting it for different cultural contexts. What had begun as a private moment between a grandmother's memory and her granddaughter had become a global phenomenon that would force conversations about royal tradition, family legacy, and the power of images to shape public understanding of private institutions. The palace prepared for a long night of crisis management, knowing that the morning would bring even more intense scrutiny and demands for official response. Charlotte, meanwhile, slept peacefully in her room, unaware that her moment of connection with her grandmother's memory had created ripples that would extend far beyond the palace walls and influence royal protocol for generations to come. Monday morning arrived at Buckingham Palace with the weight of a constitutional crisis. By 7 a.m., the photograph of Princess Charlotte and Diana's Spencer tiara had become the most discussed royal image since the Queen's death. The palace press office, led by seasoned communications director Rebecca Matthews, faced an unprecedented challenge: how to respond to an unauthorized photograph that had captured the public imagination while potentially undermining decades of carefully managed royal messaging. The emergency meeting convened in the palace's crisis management room at 8 a.m. sharp included representatives from across the royal household. Prince William had returned overnight from Scotland, his military engagement cut short by the developing situation. Catherine had abandoned her charity crisis to focus on what threatened to become a much larger problem. King Charles, awakened at dawn with news of the photograph's global impact, had requested a full briefing on the situation's implications for the monarchy's carefully maintained public image. Rebecca Matthews began the meeting with a comprehensive analysis of overnight developments. The photograph has been shared over 100 million times across all platforms, she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the crisis. We're dealing with universally positive public sentiment, but increasingly pointed questions from constitutional experts about protocol and authorization. The central challenge facing the palace team was unprecedented in its complexity. Traditional crisis management focused on controlling damage from negative stories or inappropriate behavior. This situation presented the opposite problem: How to manage a story that was overwhelmingly positive in public perception but potentially dangerous in its constitutional implications. Dr. Margaret Hensley, the palace's constitutional advisor, outlined the legal and traditional concerns raised by Charlotte's photograph tribute. The Spencer tiara represents Lady Diana's connection to her birth family rather than the royal household, she explained. By extension, Princess Charlotte wearing it could be interpreted as emphasizing her Spencer heritage over her Windsor identity. In constitutional terms, this raises questions about where her ultimate loyalty lies. William's frustration with this analysis was immediately apparent. "She's 9 years old," he said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. She wanted to connect with her grandmother's memory. The constitutional implications of a child's innocent gesture seem rather beside the point. However, Catherine understood the broader concerns more clearly than her husband's emotional response allowed. "It's not about Charlotte's intentions," she said quietly. "It's about how others will use this image to advance their own narratives about the royal family's future direction." The team's analysis revealed several concerning developments that had emerged overnight. Republican groups in Australia had already seized on the photograph as evidence that the younger royals were distancing themselves from traditional monarchical symbols. Scottish independence advocates were interpreting Charlotte's choice to wear a Spencer family piece rather than crown jewels as symbolic support for breaking away from English traditions. More troubling still were the social media accounts linked to foreign governments that had begun amplifying the photograph with commentary designed to emphasize division within the British royal family. Russian-linked accounts were promoting interpretations that suggested William and Catherine were deliberately undermining King Charles's authority. Chinese social media campaigns were using the image to question the stability of British institutions. "We're not just dealing with a family photograph anymore," Rebecca Matthews concluded. "We're dealing with an image that's being weaponized by actors who want to destabilize the monarchy's public standing." The morning's newspaper coverage reflected the story's complex dynamics. The Daily Mail's front page featured a side-by-side comparison of Charlotte and Diana under the headline, "The People's Princess Lives On." The Times took a more analytical approach, examining the constitutional questions raised by the unauthorized photograph. The Guardian focused on what they termed the democratization of royal imagery, suggesting that Charlotte's tribute represented a new generation's more casual relationship with royal protocol. International coverage was even more varied and potentially problematic. American media overwhelmingly celebrated the photograph as a beautiful family moment, with CNN's royal correspondent declaring it the most humanizing royal image in decades. However, European coverage was more skeptical, with French media questioning whether the photograph represented appropriate use of a child for political messaging. The palace team's most immediate concern was developing a response strategy that addressed legitimate constitutional questions without appearing to criticize a 9-year-old girl's innocent gesture. Traditional palace responses involved measured statements that acknowledged events without providing excessive detail or interpretation. However, this situation demanded something more nuanced, given the photograph's positive public reception and the constitutional implications of appearing to criticize Charlotte's tribute to her grandmother. King Charles's position on the matter was conveyed through his private secretary during the morning meeting. The king understood both the emotional significance of Charlotte's gesture and the potential complications it created for royal protocol. His primary concern was ensuring that the response protected Charlotte from criticism while maintaining respect for the traditions that governed royal public appearances. His Majesty believes that family connections should be celebrated, the private secretary reported. However, he also believes that such celebrations should occur within appropriate frameworks that consider both immediate and long-term implications for the institution. The challenge of crafting an appropriate response was complicated by the need to balance multiple competing interests. William and Catherine wanted to protect their daughter while acknowledging the beauty of her tribute to Diana. King Charles needed to maintain constitutional propriety while avoiding any appearance of criticizing his granddaughter. The broader royal household required a response that prevented similar unauthorized incidents while not appearing reactionary or controlling. Dr. Hartwell's role in facilitating the photograph continued to generate internal debate throughout the morning. The curator's decades of faithful service to the royal collection were unquestioned, but her decision to allow Charlotte to wear the tiara and then photograph the moment represented a significant breach of protocol. The question facing palace officials was whether Dr. Hartwell's actions deserved censure or understanding, given the exceptional circumstances and emotional significance of the moment. Personal statements from Dr. Hartwell, obtained by media outlets through unknown sources, revealed the depth of her emotional connection to the incident. "I have spent 30 years preserving beautiful things that nobody ever sees," she was quoted as saying. "When I watched Princess Charlotte connect with her grandmother's memory through that tiara, I saw history coming alive. Sometimes preserving beauty means sharing it, not just storing it." The curator's perspective resonated with many members of the public who had grown frustrated with royal protocol that seemed to prioritize secrecy over connection. Social media campaigns supporting Dr. Hartwell began emerging by mid-morning, with hashtags like #LetHistoryLive and #SupportDar trending alongside continued discussion of Charlotte's photograph. Meanwhile, Prince William faced the additional challenge of explaining the situation to his other children without creating family tension or suggesting that Charlotte had done anything wrong. George, as the future king, needed to understand both the beauty of his sister's gesture and the protocols that would govern his own interactions with royal artifacts. Louis, still very young, required simpler explanations about family traditions and appropriate behavior. Catherine's response to the crisis reflected her characteristic thoughtfulness about the intersection of private family life and public duty. Her primary concern was protecting Charlotte from any sense that her innocent tribute to her grandmother had caused problems. At the same time, she understood that the incident required a response that acknowledged both the photograph's beauty and the importance of proper protocols for future situations. The palace press team worked throughout the morning to craft a statement that would satisfy constitutional requirements while protecting Charlotte and acknowledging the public's positive response to her tribute. Multiple drafts were prepared, each attempting to balance respect for Diana's memory, appreciation for Charlotte's gesture, and commitment to appropriate protocols for future incidents. International diplomatic implications emerged as foreign governments began requesting clarification about the photograph's significance for royal succession planning. Several Commonwealth nations expressed concern that emphasis on Charlotte's Spencer heritage might indicate reduced commitment to her role within the broader royal family. These concerns required careful diplomatic management to avoid misunderstandings about the family's priorities and commitments. Legal experts began weighing in on questions surrounding the Spencer tiara's ownership and appropriate use. While the tiara was housed at Kensington Palace as part of the royal collection, its ownership remained with the Spencer family, creating complex questions about authorization for its use in official or semi-official capacities. These legal intricacies added another layer of complexity to an already challenging situation. The afternoon brought additional developments that further complicated the palace's response strategy. A petition supporting Dr. Hartwell's actions and calling for greater public access to royal artifacts gained over 1 million signatures within 6 hours. Celebrity endorsements of Charlotte's tribute continued to accumulate, with notable figures from entertainment, fashion, and politics weighing in with supportive statements. Perhaps most significantly, polling data began emerging that showed overwhelming public support for Charlotte's tribute, with over 80% of respondents describing the photograph as beautiful or appropriate. These numbers made it extremely difficult for the palace to craft a response that appeared critical of the incident without risking public backlash. As the day progressed, it became clear that the palace faced a crisis unlike any in recent memory. Rather than managing negative publicity or inappropriate behavior, they were grappling with how to respond to an incident that was overwhelmingly popular with the public, but potentially problematic from constitutional and protocol perspectives. The traditional tools of royal crisis management seemed inadequate for a situation that required acknowledging beauty and emotional significance while maintaining institutional integrity and appropriate boundaries for future incidents. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected development that would reshape the entire narrative surrounding Charlotte's tribute to Diana. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, issued an unscheduled statement that caught both the palace and media completely off guard. Speaking from Lambeth Palace, The Archbishop described Charlotte's gesture as a beautiful expression of family love that transcends protocol and speaks to the eternal bonds that connect generations. The Archbishop's intervention was particularly significant because of his unique position within the constitutional framework of the United Kingdom. As the senior cleric of the Church of England and a key figure in royal ceremonial functions, his words carried weight that extended far beyond religious circles. His explicit support for Charlotte's tribute effectively provided theological and constitutional cover for what critics had characterized as a breach of royal protocol. When a child reaches out to touch the memory of a beloved grandmother, the Archbishop continued, we witness something sacred that should be celebrated rather than criticized. The young princess has reminded us all that love transcends institutional boundaries, and that family connections are among God's greatest gifts. The Archbishop's statement fundamentally altered the political dynamics surrounding the photograph. Opposition MPs who had been preparing to question the incident in Parliament found themselves in the awkward position of appearing to contradict the head of the established church. Conservative supporters of traditional royal protocol struggled to reconcile their respect for the Archbishop's authority with their concerns about precedent and proper procedure. Within hours of the Archbishop's statement, other unexpected voices began emerging in support of Charlotte's tribute. Dame Judi Dench, whose portrayal of Queen Victoria had earned her widespread respect as an interpreter of royal history, issued a statement praising Charlotte's natural grace and instinctive understanding of her family's legacy. Sir David Attenborough, rarely involved in royal commentary, observed that the young princess demonstrates the kind of authentic connection to heritage that no amount of formal training can manufacture. These endorsements from figures known for their wisdom and restraint gave additional legitimacy to Charlotte's actions and made criticism more difficult for those who might otherwise have questioned the appropriateness of the incident. More importantly, they began to shift the narrative from one focused on protocol violations to one celebrating the natural evolution of royal traditions in response to genuine family connections. However, not all reactions were supportive. A group of constitutional scholars led by Professor Margaret Thornfield of Oxford University issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern about the precedent being set by the incident. While Princess Charlotte's tribute to her grandmother is undoubtedly touching, their statement read, the informal nature of its execution raises important questions about the proper procedures for accessing and displaying items of historical and constitutional significance. Professor Thornfield's concerns resonated with traditionalists who worried that tolerance for Charlotte's unauthorized use of the Spencer tiara might encourage future breaches of protocol. Their argument focused not on the appropriateness of Charlotte's tribute itself, but on the broader implications of allowing emotion and family connection to override established procedures for handling significant royal artifacts. The debate between supporters and critics began to reveal deeper philosophical divisions within British society about the role of tradition versus accessibility in modern royal life. Progressive voices argued that Charlotte's tribute demonstrated the monarchy's ability to remain relevant by embracing authentic human moments over rigid protocol. Conservative voices countered that respect for established procedures was essential to maintaining the dignity and stability that made the monarchy effective as a constitutional institution. Earl Spencer's continued support for his great-niece tribute provided crucial legitimacy for the palace's evolving response strategy. In a more detailed statement released Tuesday afternoon, Diana's brother explicitly addressed questions about authorization and appropriateness. The Spencer tiara was created to be worn by Spencer women in celebration of family milestones, he explained. Princess Charlotte's tribute to her grandmother represents exactly the kind of meaningful family moment for which such heirlooms exist. Earl Spencer's statement was particularly powerful because it addressed the ownership and authorization questions that had complicated the palace's response. As a member of the family that technically owned the tiara, his explicit approval of Charlotte's use provided legal and emotional justification that made continued criticism more difficult. The international dimension of the story continued to evolve in unexpected directions. President Biden's administration, through a carefully crafted statement from the State Department, praised Charlotte's tribute as a beautiful example of how family love transcends borders and speaks to universal human values. The statement, while diplomatic in nature, represented a significant endorsement from America's most powerful ally. European reactions proved more complex and politically charged. French President Macron's office issued a statement celebrating the young princess's natural elegance and her obvious connection to her family's heritage. However, the subtext of French commentary focused on Charlotte's choice to wear a Spencer family piece rather than traditional crown jewels, interpreting this as evidence of the younger generation's more independent approach to royal identity. German media analysis proved particularly insightful.